So it's taken a little bit to wrap your head around this idea that you don't even need to be the world's foremost expert. You just need to know something about a thing and share it. Be willing to share it with someone who's even like one level behind you, right? So we all have something to offer. You don't have to know it all to be able to offer it.
I'm James Stuber, and this is the Strangely Earnest Podcast. Our guest today is none other than the Notion Queen herself, Marie Poulin. Welcome, Marie.
Thanks for having me.
For joining.
Yeah.
Can you give a quick introduction for people who aren't familiar with you?
Yeah, so I do digital operations. I teach people how to design their workflow, typically at the moment anyway, with Notion. So that's kind of been the layer on top of, digital workflow design. So that's where the majority of my time and energy is going at the moment, mostly through teaching, through my course. I'm not doing as much consulting anymore, but I've brought in assistant coaches and things like that to help me with that process. So you're kind of catching me at a bit of an interesting time in my career. So happy to chat about any of that evolution.
Amazing. But before we jump in, I do have to ask you about your crazy rocket spaceship plant tower thing.
The tower garden. Yeah, the tower garden was kind of a hilarious indulgence that I bought myself this year. It's like an indoor hydroponic setup where you can just grow your greens and vegetables indoor year round. And the deer have a way of ravaging my garden every freaking year. And so this is my gotcha. Bit of a nerdy hobby. Yeah, exactly. It's so fun.
Yeah, my girlfriend has been getting into plants as well during this quarantine, and this is one of hers.
Yes, I feel like every kind of surface, I'm like, how can I maximize the number of plants per square footage?
Exactly.
It's a problem.
Yeah, speaking of plants and things like that, I know you're interested in permaculture. First, what is permaculture? And then how has that influenced the way you think about operations and planning?
Yeah, I mean, permaculture is essentially, it's like a design philosophy, if you will. It's based in designing with sustainability in mind. It's influenced by the patterns in nature. I didn't even really know what permaculture was when I signed up for it. I'd heard the word thrown around quite a bit. And so I like to share with people the phrase that I read on this poster that was an advertisement for the course, because it pretty much captured everything that I was trying to do. So the poster said, become a more conscious designer of your life, landscape, relationships, and work while learning how to save time, energy, and money. I'm like, that's pretty compelling. Is that permaculture? I had no idea. So I was speaking my language. I don't know what I'm signing up for, but yes, take my money. And I signed up for it.
Sounds like one of your courses, actually.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, permaculture has really, I think it resonated so much because, similar to you, I read your bio on your page, and this idea that this obsession for what is the most efficient way to do this? How do we become the most productive and systemize everything? And so a lot of the concepts in permaculture were things I'd heard maybe in a different frame in the sort of productivity world. And I was like, oh, this is totally business advice, but from nature. And it was so nerdy, but I couldn't help but see the sort of business language in it, just because, that's kind of how my brain works. I'm just always kind of thinking in business terms. So everything I was hearing just resonated so deeply, least change for greatest effect, designing things at the pattern level. So it just, everything I was hearing, I'm like, yep. This is business. This is life. It's all part of the same sort of design mechanism. And it kind of felt like designing from first principles. I know you talk about master those boring fundamentals. That's kind of what permaculture felt like, was this almost deep universal truths in a way.
Yeah, the more I hear about permaculture, the more I'm like, man, I really should take these and these concepts and these ideas and try to apply them to productivity systems as well, not just business. Yeah, I think there's a lot that can be applied there.
And playing to your strengths, just being aware of what gives you energy and what takes energy away. We hear a lot of it's when in the day, what's your chronotype, or kind of when are you most energized, and what are the activities that are energizing you? It's all the same stuff. We just give it different language. And so for me, I think the permaculture language was actually so accessible But I think most people don't really know what permaculture is, or you think of like, oh, it's gardening, it's learning how to garden better. And so I think there's such a missed opportunity. So I'm like, cool, how can I apply the principles of permaculture to business? And I want to design a framework around that. So it's definitely been a huge influence in kind of how I think about business for sure.
Awesome. Can you think of a specific example where you took an idea from permaculture and applied it to your business?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things they make you do in permaculture is, at least with this course, you're taking a year of observation, which feels like a lot, right? You're like, I want to be
Yeah.
like making things happen.
Yeah.
But if I start, designing garden beds in a certain part of the yard, and then by November, like there's no sun in that area, and I've planted like whatever plants there. So it's this idea, pay attention first to what you're working with and doing a bit of a zone analysis, which the idea is that you're designing for frequency of use, right? So the closest to the center is like the things you're doing all the time. And then further out is like further distance, literally further distance, but also could be things that you're just not doing as often. So you're thinking like, what are the things that are going to have the highest impact in my life? And for us, like with my husband and I, we had a software that we were working on, and it was the part of our business that took the most time and energy for the least financial and emotional result. And it was a reality check for us. It was like, why are we spending so much time, energy, attention in this one part of our business that actually is not making us happy? It's not exciting. It takes up a lot and gives very little in return. And so that kind of light bulb moment really shifted the way I think about other activities in my business too, not just the software, but like, where was my time going? And like, what's the point? And like, why would I be working on stuff that's just not lighting me up? So it kind of gave me a different lens for how I think about work and what I'm taking on.
That's really cool. It's, when you're in the trenches, it's super hard to take a step back like that and go, wait, like where's my time going? Why am I spending so much time on this specific thing and not on the things that are bringing me energy and bringing me more, more revenue?
And we talk about from a productivity, like the 80-20 and that sort of thing, right? So a lot of those concepts were not totally new to me, but there was something about the framing of it that I was like, yeah, okay, it's landing in a different way. And so we actually made the call, like, you know what, if this is not lighting up either of us, maybe we shouldn't keep pursuing this. Like maybe it's time to shut down signups and switch our focus. So that was something that we did. So I'm a big fan of like, where are those leverage points and how can we just make our time and our energy work, better for us.
Yeah, for sure. So you've decided to shut down that software side of the business. That's what's happening?
Yeah, like we're still in that process, but we shut down sign up. So new people can't sign up. We're still maintaining. So I guess you could say we're in maintenance mode, but we're not accepting new signups. And for a while we were deciding, does it make sense to sell it? And we were doing the research to do that. And we actually had somebody make us an offer, and we were, talking it through. And the time and energy it was still going to take my husband to get it to the point where he could hand it off, whether it was like documentation or training somebody new. Yeah, we could do that. But again, for the payoff, it didn't really make sense. And we just thought, let's just maintain it for the people who, are still paying us and it still works for them and it's great, but be clear with them. Like, we're not going to be adding new features. This is not our primary, focus point. So give people a year or 2 years to kind of move off the software. So it was always like a very small percentage of our revenue. And we just thought, yeah, it's like my husband got offered a full-time job. And that was like the real, okay, at this point, like it's really going to take extra time, energy, and attention. And it just didn't really make sense.
I mean, that's sort of coinciding with this recent kind of explosion in your own products. Your Notion course and your YouTube have both, just absolutely skyrocketed in the past year.
Weirdly exploded. Yeah, very strange. Yeah, I'm happy to answer like any parts of that, but it definitely felt like it almost felt like everything took a left turn when I was like, hey, I'm seeing all this traction with Notion. What were to happen if I were to double down on it, like as an experiment? And I've always kind of considered myself a bit of a generalist. Like I have lots of interests, and I've done client work, I've done the software thing, I've done courses, I've done a little bit of everything, and I've never really hung my hat on one thing ever consistently. And I thought, oh, this niching thing, like, okay, let's try it. Let's like see what happens here. And so, and And as soon as I decided, it was like, holy crap, the momentum and the YouTube videos, I kind of decided I'm going to use YouTube as a chance to like fill those gaps and to answer those questions. And I was like, whoa, my gosh, it grew so fast that, I had people like making comments about my terrible video, like your hair looks terrible or whatever. I was like, oh, wow. Like, and so, and I think you were in Ali Abdal's part-time YouTuber course too, right? Yeah. And I think obviously, Notion's kind of a rocket ship, and I feel like it's kind of an exception. My growth, a big part of it was because I had decided to kind of attach myself to Notion. So the growth that I experienced on YouTube felt almost like artificially huge, like so fast that my own skills around video production and storytelling and all of that were not at the level that my subscriber count would indicate. So I was like, oh, it just felt very overwhelming. I'm like, oh, I guess I need to figure out this whole YouTube thing. Yeah. So it was pretty overwhelming at first while I was finding my footing and finding like, how deep do I want to go down this Notion rabbit hole? That was... Yeah. It was a concern of mine, like, do I want to be associated with a software? There's always risks when you do that, right? Like just like our own software, like what happens when the software you've been using for a while suddenly no longer exists or changes? So it was something I had thought deeply about. And I thought, what's the worst that can happen? I've done so many different roles and things, and I know I have so much value to offer. I've shifted gears so many times in my career. What if this is just a chapter and I have some fun with it? What could happen?
Yeah. So you've obviously thought about this pretty deeply. If Notion were to say, go out of business tomorrow and just magically disappear, like, what would you do?
Yeah, I would pivot again. And I think despite the fact that a lot of my work is centered around Notion, or in a way, Notion is almost like the sell them what they want, give them what they need. So the course, for example, is a lot more about designing your own workflow, that we happen to do that in Notion. It's not necessarily like learn how to use Notion, the tool. And that's in some ways a little bit of a surprise. People come in expecting just to learn about the tool, and they're like, oh, I didn't realize this is like learning for how to live better in a way. And so of course I can't help but infuse all that permaculture stuff into the course. Yeah. Like that's the sort of stuff I'm like, it's like sneaking in the vegetables, right?
I love that research. It's great.
Yeah. And so it's a delight, it's a surprise. And so if something changes, I would just be using a different tool, just like I have, throughout my whole career. It's like, okay, shift gears, let's try something different, but the principles are enduring, right?
Yeah, for sure. You're taking this principles approach. And that means that whatever tool you use, you can apply those principles to any tool. It doesn't have to be Notion. It doesn't have to be Roam or Evernote or whatever.
Exactly. I think what's so neat about, tools like Notion and Roam, and I think it's a tool for, again, helping you notice how you think and how you show up and how you operate. And because there is thinking involved, because the tool isn't opinionated, you're having to layer on your own best practices in a way. So it's forcing you to think a little bit more deeply about why you set something up a certain way. So it's more work. And for some people, that's quite frustrating. Like, I just want a tool that works, just like, let me in there. And, Asana is a great to-do list manager. Notion is not a to-do list manager. It's something quite different. And I think it's more of a creative tool. So I think it attracts different kind of people. Different tools, I think, do inherently kind of attract different people. But I just think it's such a creative tool for like self-development work in a way, to help you just notice your own behavior and how you think about things.
Yeah, I think that's such an overlooked part of productivity in general, is everyone is searching for the perfect system that works for everything, but really it boils down to figuring out how you operate and how, what are the structures that work for you, what are the formats and the tools that best suit your own personal work style, and finding that out and figuring that out is a difficult process. But once you get to that point, you're not reliant on a specific tool. You're not reliant on, some, perfect magical system to all be in place for you to get stuff done.
Exactly. Yep. Totally agree.
So you've been sort of a, quote unquote creator for, many years now. And I think, just a few years ago, it would have felt kind of crazy to say like, oh yeah, I'm a full-time YouTuber, or I'm a full-time course creator. But now I think people are starting to realize that this kind of thing is becoming a new normal, especially I feel like, the whole pandemic has sort of accelerated the acceptance of paying for paying good money for courses online, for the effectiveness of these courses online. Talk to me about like the whole like creator economy and what you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have been someone that has always been willing to buy online courses. Like that's been my universe for a really long time. I
Same.
think that's, like I think that's even why like my husband and I built course software. Like we were so in that space and seeing how many of our clients, like again, I sort of got my start as a web designer and digital strategist. So I was working with so many people that had websites and these online course ecosystems and membership communities. And those were the clients that had the budgets to pay us. And I was like, oh, interesting. There's like something here to this whole, like, having digital products and having courses and things that have a little bit more leverage than that one-on-one time. So I think I've certainly been steeped in that world for a long time. And, we've talked about this on Twitter, like how much of our budget goes toward that learning. And if I can pay a little bit of this money here to fast track this long-term, save time or kind of fast track my learning, like a lot of us are quite willing to do that. Not everybody has the capacity necessarily financially, but so I do think it's becoming more normalized. For me, I guess it's been normal for a while, but I'm seeing it more public, right? Like people on Twitter definitely are talking more about it. They're sharing more of their process, which I find is so interesting. It's really cool to see how common and normalized it's becoming to share numbers or what worked or what didn't, or hey, here's how many followers I had on this date and check out what changed. And, I think it's really valuable, obviously, for people to be sharing not just the numbers, but here's what I learned along the way, and here are some things that can save you time. So it's cool to see how these trends change over time, especially on Twitter. I feel like Twitter has such a different vibe today than it did like 10 years ago.
Yeah, for sure.
It's totally different now, and the conversations and the community and things that are happening, it's so interesting. On the YouTube front, I do find that part really interesting too, because if you told me 2 years ago even that, oh, you're going to have a YouTube channel and that's going to be where you spend any of your time, I probably wouldn't have believed you. But it's just kind of unbeatable as a medium in terms of the way we feel connected to people on video, and especially with the pandemic. Like we're kind of almost more used to being on video now, right? Like Zoom calls and everything is happening through video. So again, it's becoming more normalized, and combine the sharing and the video, like it's just becoming, I think, I don't say more comfortable, because I still think it takes time, right? To build that muscle. It feels so weird and silly to look into a camera lens when there's like no one there, right? And it's like we got our teleprompters and we're like, la, la, la.
It's super weird.
It's very strange. So I certainly wouldn't have believed it, but I've just seen the power in that as a medium for creating transformation. And it's hard to beat in terms of the free traffic, right? Like that alignment. If someone's looking for the thing and it gets served to them at the right moment, it's an incredible way to build your brand.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about, things like revenue, and, in the past, I think talking about numbers and stuff like that is almost sort of seen as a kind of a taboo, or like if you are talking numbers, like 5-10 years ago, people talking numbers on Twitter were all, they're bragging about like, oh, I made $1 million this year and I bought a Lambo and I've got my yacht. But now it's become this thing to build in public and to say, hey, like I made a piece of software and it made $100 last month and I'm celebrating, and everyone is super happy about that. How do you navigate that space of being willing to talk about numbers while also not coming off as like you're bragging or like you're showing off? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that is exactly the space that I am trying to navigate right now. I feel like I've often shared generously in terms of my experience. I do feel like it can get a little bit tricky whenever you start talking about money. A lot of us have very preconceived notions of and stories of what it means when someone has money, or we assume that people that are making a lot of money with their products had a trust fund, or like, and we make a lot of assumptions about people. And like my husband and I have had tons of arguments about this, because we come from very different backgrounds and different perspectives on money. So, I grew up not really having any, but thinking anything was possible. I was so motivated to kind of leave the level of revenue that my parents earned. I was like, I know I can do better. Like I don't want to to be in debt. Like my parents in a way kind of normalized debt. They were like, oh, well, the world runs on debt. Like that's just how it is. And so I kind of grew up with that, but I was so tired of being in debt. I'm like, no, I know that I'm meant for more than this. And my husband is more like, people don't leave their economic tier, like most people typically stay within whatever economic
it's difficult to move up.
It is, right? It's harder. Like it's definitely harder, but not impossible. And so we often had these like nature nurture and like, are we destined to stay within the economic circles that we're born into? And so it's tricky. So, my husband sometimes would assume if someone had a lot of money, it's like, oh, that must be nice, or like, must be nice to have a trust fund. I'm like, how much do you actually know about that person's background? Because you're making a lot of assumptions that person has access to capital. Yes, access to capital makes things easier, but there's plenty of people that have capital, but haven't done the practice, haven't hone their skills, like for sure. And there's lots of people that have access to nothing and they're able to do incredible things in their life. So I've been a big believer in that. Nurture is a huge part. Like, who are the mentors? Who are the people that you have access to? If we are the sum of the 5 people that we spend the most time with, well, whose opinions do I want to be listening to, and kind of what am I paying attention to that's going to elevate me and move me forward? So it's kind of like a very long-winded way of answering your question, but all it's to say is, like, talking about money is uncomfortable. People make a lot of assumptions. I'm very mindful of that and very aware of that. And whenever I'm sharing, I want to share the lessons and the learnings and this is possible, but it's also really hard work. And I've put in that hard work, and you can too. And in fact, it might be a little easier if you like learn from these mistakes here. So I think how it's delivered and how it's presented can go a long way in terms of empowering people versus, hey, I'm just celebrating my win, right? So I am definitely navigating that space too. And I'm curious if you have any sort of gut thoughts about it. Like, do you feel uncomfortable when people share their earnings, or are you like, yeah, you go, buddy?
Yeah, I'm more on the side of, honestly, I used to be on the side of like, oh, like you're just bragging, whatever. Like, oh, you're talking.
Must be nice, or
it must be nice, or like, oh, that's just gross revenue. You're not talking about your like total, your
gross
actual
profit.
Revenue.
Yeah.
Right. And now I've come around to thinking more like you are, where it's sharing these numbers and sharing what's possible is a hugely, I think, empowering thing to do. I had no idea that people could make a living by selling courses online or by being a YouTuber. And watching Tiago Forte has shared some of his numbers. Like Ali Abdal is talking about how much he makes as a YouTuber now, and it's eye-opening to see those numbers. And if you can step beyond that like, oh, it must be nice type of feeling, and go, oh, okay,
what can I learn from this?
What can I learn from this? And like, what can I learn about, how the internet is making all of this stuff possible now? Whereas maybe it's true. And in the past, it was hard to move up, significantly between different economic levels. But now we have access to these tools like, like YouTube or like Notion, where we have so much power available for basically free, right? It's insane that you can upload thousands of hours to YouTube and they'll host it for free. That's crazy. So I actually am coming around to believing that sharing numbers like this, and in a thoughtful way, of course. I think if you made a tweet if you made a tweet tomorrow that was like, I made like $1 bajillion on my Notion course, I'd be kind of mad at you. But I think doing it in a respectful way, where it's like, hey, this is what's possible with years of work and building an audience and building useful content and useful products that people want, that this is something that's possible.
Yeah. And I think, context is so helpful too. Like, with courses like Ali Abdal's and Building a Second Brain, there's a team, right? There's a whole team supporting people. And so I think there's often that like myth of the indie creator making, crap tons of money, and you're going to hit a ceiling at some point. I mean, there's lots of really cool indie people that are making like a boatload of money on their one product. But really, when you're talking about like scaling, I think we kind of depend on having more team members. So you never really know, like, what are the operations behind the scenes? Mm-hmm. What are those person's expenses? how much are they paying themselves as a salary? There's all sorts of things we don't really know. And so, yeah, I'd love to share in a thoughtful way, because I think there's so many different ways you can launch products, and that you can, there's so many different styles of courses too. Like, we've seen Tiago talk about like evergreen courses are terrible or whatever. Like people have very strong opinions one way or the other about like what makes a really good course and what makes for really great online learning. And so I think there's so many different ways to launch products. Like I, for example, have never used paid ads. I'm not paying for Facebook ads. Like I have zero interest in doing that. And I'm okay with slower growth. I mean, yeah. I can't even say my growth is slow. It's not, I'm at like 800 students right now. That's incredible.
That's crazy. Yeah.
With no paid ads, right? And so I think that's a really interesting nugget. Like I'd love to share with people, here's how I built a course and scaled it up to this many students without paid ads. Where did I focus my energy and attention? What were the biggest levers that made the biggest difference for getting new students on board? So I want to share those things and make sure people know you don't have to do it the way it's always been taught, or that there isn't one best way to do it. You should be designing for your own needs, for your own goals. And my goals are going to be very different than Tiago's, are going to be very different than, David Perel's, and that's totally cool. So yeah. There's not just one way to be a creator and to make money on the internet. That's what's so fun about it. Just to see all the creativity that's coming out of it.
Yeah. I think when Tiago tweets things like that, he's almost trolling.
He's doing research. Oh yeah,
he's definitely doing research.
We see you, Tiago.
There's that adage, if you want to learn something on the internet, post something that's wrong, and 100 people will come give you the right answer.
Totally.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So yeah, you say you want to talk about what are the levers that you can pull. So let's say I eventually want to make some kind of course. I don't know what yet. I got to figure out what that looks like. But if you were giving advice to me to be selfish, like what would you say are the biggest levers you would pull for growing students?
Yeah, and would you say for like starting the course or for growing a course once you have it?
Let's say growing a course once you have one.
Yeah, I like to tap into where are people already coming from, right? Like what's the best source of people finding out about my course, doubling down on what's working. I think obviously video is excellent. So simple things, right? Like your link to your course is always in your signature. It's always in your YouTube descriptions. Like what are the quickest ways to just get people knowing what you're up to? I think a lot of folks make the mistake in the beginning, like you kind of, because you feel like you're talking about your thing all the time, you assume everyone already knows about it. And so often people need to hear about it in a number of different places. It should be super obvious in your profile, right? It should be anywhere people are learning about your work or seeing what you're up to, that course should be there. It should be so clear. One of the things like I do that, I'm much more of like a casual salesperson. Like I don't email my list as often as I should, and I don't make really hard sales pitches, and so I'm going to attract a different audience, right? It might take a longer time frame before someone signs up for my thing, but I would much rather have someone have taken that time and they're pretty set, like they've made the decision, they've saved up the money to do that. So I'm no expert on paid ads or anything like that. I'm really big on organic marketing. How do I answer people's questions through video? Hey, if you really like this and you want to go deeper, I go deeper in my course. You can check it out here. But like, it's very casual. It's like an invitation, like come if you'd like to learn more about this. Casually mentioning it in blog posts, just cross-linking it wherever you can. Affiliates, right? So your students that are already talking about it and bragging about it and so excited and doing tweet storms about it, or Instagram and that sort of thing, just share those, right? Like elevate your students, and wherever I think you can draw attention to your student successes, whether it's through YouTube videos, bringing on your students into a YouTube video. Like in my case, some of the students that were, the best, or like, showed up quite a bit and really sent me amazing testimonials, like, hey, want to come on to office hours? Let's showcase your setup. Like, this is amazing. And so there's that just feeling of community, and it's very powerful to help other people be seen. So if I can make other people feel like, wow, I see what you're doing and I love it. How can I support you? There's just that like bond, I think, that gets created between the teacher and the student, that you've got their back and they're so excited to tell other people about it. So big on the organic marketing.
Yeah, that's such a great approach. I think back to the courses that I really enjoyed, and they've always been ones where I knew the creator beforehand, and like I've read their stuff or I've seen them on YouTube or, on Twitter or wherever. And it feels like I already trust this person and I know that whatever course they put out is going to be great. And that's almost always the case.
Totally. Yep. Yeah. I think there's so many, I think, interesting creative ways you can share what you're working on, like, interesting tweet storms that aren't just buy my course, but it's talking about the experience of what happens in your course, right? Like what is that outcome? So yeah, lots of ways, but I think highlighting student successes is probably number one.
Yeah, that's such a great idea. And that's one of the reasons I started this podcast was I'm already chatting with people, and why not use a platform, whatever platform I have, to, elevate other people, elevate other people's work, and also, share these ideas. I love talking about this stuff, and I would love to meet even more people who enjoy this kind of conversation.
Absolutely. It's so fascinating to me how much can be learned from a conversation. And this might be a bit of a segue, but one of the things that I think worked so well in the very, very first online course that I did was I worked out an arrangement with a client such that the client allowed me to share our entire project and documentation and calls, like Zoom calls and everything, as part of my course content. So one of the permaculture principles is stacking functions, right? And it's like you're doing something once, but it has multiple uses and is working for you in so many different ways. So even like recording a video and then you're using it as course material, you're using it as an onboarding, like there's so many different ways that you could use the same piece of content. So I'm just huge on whenever there's an opportunity where I'm like, I don't really have time for this thing, but how can I work this into what I'm already doing? And one example of that was a student that came to me and said, hey, do you want to collaborate on a workshop? And I was like, oh, like, I love what the student is doing. I want to collaborate with them, but oh my gosh, my schedule is like pretty full. And I was like, how would you feel if we offered your workshop under the umbrella of my course? And so you'd be like a guest coach. We'd offer it as a bundle. You'd get an affiliate revenue, so you have your own sales if it goes through yours, and we can offer it as like a bonus in the course. Like, what creative ways can we do to make this happen, but in a way that isn't adding a ton more work to my plate? So I'm always kind of open to finding what are those creative, levers that we can pull to just get the most out of what we're doing.
Yeah, it's always so great when you can think of a way that's generative to do two things that both, kind of amplify each other. Exactly. And save you time. It's great.
Exactly. Yeah.
I asked Twitter if they had any questions for you, and our friend Michael Ashcroft wanted to know, like, so you've recently sort of turned into like a really well-known course creator and YouTuber. What does that feel like, and how have you handled that transition from, being sort of relatively unknown to being someone who's, the queen of Notion?
It was weird. Yeah, it was very strange. In a way, I felt like my growth had outpaced my mindset. Like it's very strange, I think, when it's like so hard to talk about this in a weird way, because it's like people put you on a pedestal in a way, right? Like they think you're otherworldly, or you're like, oh my gosh, you're the Notion goddess, and they do kind of elevate you to this like otherworldly non-human status, and it's like, no, I'm like really just a person who really loves a tool, and so that was a little strange for sure. And starting to see like how my work is impacting people at scale. It's like, oh, this is what you wanted. Now you're starting to see it. Like, how does that feel? And then of course, all that imposter complex, those feelings come up for sure. And I do have to credit my work with Tanya Geisler. She is basically the imposter complex coach. And I've done so much work around this, around like visibility and being seen, because like this was definitely my, like it's probably what I've done the most therapy around, was my fear of being seen, being on stage. Like I've done so many courses around that, speaker coaching, acting classes, like just trying to get comfortable, whether it's in a conversation with a client, whether it's on stage, whatever that looks like, because the more and more people that invite you onto things or podcasts or to speak, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have never felt like I was at that level. So I always felt like, looking at other speakers, I'm like, how is everyone doing this? Because for 4 months, I've not been able to sleep, and like my face is breaking out, I'm freaking out, right? It's not necessarily visible to people. They're like, oh, I'd never know that you're like not comfortable doing that. So that is a little jarring in a way that I have to recognize that maybe the way I'm being perceived is quite different than how it feels in my head, or I might feel like I'm racing and the way that I'm talking in my throat is like everything feels like it's vibrating and not comfortable, but to someone else like, oh, she seems super chill. So it's taken a while to work through those nerves and just kind of see them as, yeah, like you care. It's because you care and you want to do your best work. And so it's taken a little bit to kind of wrap my head around that and to also deal with the volume of inquiries, right? Like I get random messages and questions and emails all the time. Sometimes it's like tech support emails. I'm like, oh, these people, this is where it gets tricky, where I'm like, the relationship that I have with Notion gets blurred, where people are like, oh, well, she's just like a Notion employee. Like clearly Notion's paying her to answer these questions. And I was like, like this is tricky because obviously I have a course on this. It's to my benefit to be helpful and generous and all that. But having those healthy boundaries in place to know where do those lines end and how do I keep people feeling supported and be helpful, but without sacrificing my own time. So there was a lot of that kind of, I had to wrap my head around, hire more support. Like my assistant became a much bigger part of my business and she's going to become full-time in the next month or two.
That's great.
So like, that's a huge, exciting milestone for me. I've been solo for so long, but my assistant, Georgia, has been such a big part. Like I could not have supported the growth of the course without having had her, she's answering support emails for students. If there's something, oh, my payment, I used the wrong email, like she's handling all of that stuff so that I can be present, I can focus on content. So there's been like logistical things, mindset things, lots of things along the way that have taken some time where I'm like, oh, like, okay, this is really happening. And 100,000 people just saw that video that you feel really cringy about, but like, you just gotta keep shipping. Like it's hard. And I think it gets easier, right? But it's still never comfortable. And I think that's what people need to know is it's not like creators like us don't feel uncomfortable or don't feel like, just because I have that many videos doesn't mean it's easy. It's still hard. I just keep doing it anyway, right?
Yeah, I love that framing. It's the nerves and the imposter syndrome is because you care, right? I love that framing. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, my coach, I think, kind of said it like, if you have imposter complex, it's because you are an authority and you care, right? Like you have that barometer that, certain people shouldn't talk about things unless they have some experience. So even the fact that you think like that or that you're aware of it, you're usually kind of further along than maybe your gremlins want you to think about. Just like fraudulent people, like they're not worried about imposter complex. They're just like being frauds. So it's taken a little bit to wrap your head around this idea that you don't even need to be the world's foremost expert. You just need to know something about a thing and share it. Be willing to share it with someone who's even like one level behind you, right? So we all have something to offer. You don't have to know it all to be able to offer it. So I think that's the biggest mindset of like, nobody can argue with your learned experience. So if you can just share your learned experience, there's like nothing to argue there. It's like, I'm just sharing. This isn't fact. This is just experience that I'm sharing.
And I think in many ways, it's a better way to learn as well, is to learn from someone who's, maybe one or two steps ahead of you, as opposed to learning from someone who, maybe like a developer at Notion who's so deeply embedded into it that they can't even understand what it feels like to be a beginner,
I love that. That's a good reminder. And I think that was something I struggled with too, because it's like I had spent so much time mastering this tool. And then I was like, oh, right. Like, the first time I ran it, I'm like, oh, stuff that I thought was really obvious or clear. It's like, oh, right. I forgot that actually took me a while to learn. And so it's quite humbling in the beginning, right? So I'm a huge fan of launching in beta, always. And in my case, I felt like it was a 5 or 6 month beta. In some ways, I feel like the course is never done because I'm always kind of adding content or improving it. But when you're willing to sit in that beta, like this is in progress, and selling at a lower price point while you're working through those like inner demons and gremlins and like, is this good enough? Spend the time, make it good enough, but give yourself that container to learn and play and get that student feedback before you scale it.
Yeah, I like that idea of launching a beta where it's, the people who are going to join are people who already know you pretty well, probably, and they're also willing.
Fans.
Yeah, they're super fans, and they're the ones who are going to give you the best feedback and they're also going to be forgiving when you make mistakes or whatever, right?
And then also too, I think it gives you a chance to be more generous. So, when I only promised this, but now I'm like, oh, you know what would make this course better? I really want to add this workshop on this, or I want to bring in a guest on this. And that just feels more generous.
Yeah.
Obviously you have to be careful that you're not like fire hosing people because of your own insecurities, where you're like, got to make it better. And it never finishes. Obviously you do have to kind of put some container around that. But I think if people are struggling with the confidence of putting their product out there, do it in a more rough and ready kind of invite only, send an invitation to 12 people in your inner network that's like, hey, I'm working on this course. It's going to do XYZ. Is this something you'd be interested in? I know that you've mentioned this on Twitter. Like, can you tie it in with something personal somebody's mentioned, where I said, I remember our conversation and you said this, I'm working on a course on this. Is this something you'd be interested in? And it's just a conversation. It's just an invitation. And I posted about this on Twitter, but the very first course I did was pay what you can or pay what you want. And it was like kind of an experiment in generosity. And that was part of building my own confidence. Was like, I just didn't know how to put a price on it yet. So I'm like, all right, let's have other people tell me what they think it's worth.
Yeah. I mean, and that ties back to like these revenue numbers and things like that. It's sort of when you're first building your first course or your first product, it's hard to put a price on that, or to feel like, oh, am I ripping people off? Or like, it's such a weird mind head space thing to get over.
There's so much money mindset stuff that like it's challenging. It's very challenging.
Like, Tashin and I built this product called the Digital Productivity Coach. And for the longest time it was pay what you want. And we realized that, we could charge money for this. We had upgraded it enough to the point where we felt like it was worth something. And as soon as we did, the sales started going up, and it was such a,
you're like, who knew?
Like, who knew? Like, oh.
I mean, people take things more seriously
exactly.
when there's money associated with it, right? Like, I think it was Tara McMullen that said the price tells a story. So what story are you telling with your products? If you're not even valuing your own products, I bought lots of like $29 like course bundles that include 300 courses, and maybe you dip into like 3 or 4. But yeah, our price does tell a story. And Mariah Cause has been a big part of my own like mindset shift around money too. Seeing what a very, very high-end course experience looks like, or coaching program, where $10,000 coaching programs, $20,000 coaching programs, and then to hear the people in that group share like $5,000 hourly rates, like it ain't no thing. And I was like, whoa, okay, that puts things in perspective when I'm pricing my course. Holy moly! So it's there's an art to it for sure.
Yeah, it really changes your conception of what's possible and what people are willing to pay for services. And the stuff you're teaching is super valuable, and to the right business, to the right person, that it's a no-brainer, right? It's such a weird like headspace to get around.
But that's why too, sharing I think is so important, and having access to those conversations, because if you didn't know that was possible, right? Like if I didn't know, like there are people charging $5,000 an hour and making good money doing that, or that you can charge this amount for a coaching program, and people are super happy to pay that and that feel like they got a ton out of it. So if we don't know that those price points even exist, like I know like a couple years ago, even I'd hear people, I still kind of cringe when I hear people say like your 6-figure X, or like when anything is positioned around like building your 6 or 7-figure business. I'm like, cringe, like whatever. That's fine. But often I found those people, I just thought those people were full of shit, right? It's like, oh, sure, whatever. Like some of the numbers just seemed so outrageous. So I was like, whatever, that's not the norm and blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, oh, well, when you find product market fit, that can be the norm. Like those numbers actually aren't that unreasonable when you do the math, when you're not charging $29 for things that you're putting so many hours in. So yeah, it takes a while. And obviously it takes experience to know kind of how much you can charge for something, and what value does it carry for the person that's willing to pay.
So you've got your Notion Mastery course. You've got a YouTube channel that's blowing up. What's next on your pipeline? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, the YouTube is still pretty inconsistent, right? So when I first started, I was doing a video every week. I think for 12 weeks, I managed to pull it off. Then I collapsed. I was like, oh, because I needed to shift gears and work on the course content.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make sure, like, for me, the hardest part was discerning, well, how much do I talk about on YouTube versus behind the course, and how do you like find, how generous are you with the content? And I know Ali Abdallah talked about this a little bit, like err on the side of being just more generous, right? Like the course is not just about like, it's the same videos, like there's a different experience there. So sometimes I've had to think about that, in that I want the people that sign up for the course to feel like they always kind of get first access. They're always kind of, oh, what's Marie thinking about next, or what's happening there. So finding that pace and that balance is definitely something I'd like to get more consistent with my YouTube publishing, get into more of a workflow. I'm definitely going to be revisiting those videos from Ali, and going back to the productivity videos, and really figuring out how to batch the content in a really smart way, for sure. That's one piece. And then like my permaculture business framework, like it's been simmering for a long time, and I've been like applying it in these different ways and teasing it out, but I want to talk about it more. And even though it feels like unfinished and scary, I'm like, well, that's a sign that you got to talk about it.
Yeah,
so
that's the fun part.
Yeah, so it feels intimidating because I don't know where it's heading. Like, is there a book? Is there a framework? Is there a course? I don't really know, and I have to be more comfortable with that unknown. So just shipping more generously, sharing more behind the scenes, and just continuing to like find more leverage wherever I can.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to hear more about permaculture, whatever you come up with in that space.
Awesome.
And to see more YouTube videos.
Yeah,
your studio is already looking much better. It's great.
Every week it gets a little bit better, right?
Yeah.
It's like each of our videos kind of gets better each time.
Yeah, I mean, every time you upload a video, it's like there's like 5,000 things. You're just like, oh, I could have done that better. It's the worst.
I'm curious, how you like, even like what's your YouTube experience felt like in that vein as well.
Yeah, I mean, ever since taking Ali's course, I've been launching a video a week about, and it's always, it just feels like every time I upload, I'm just like, oh man, there's like 100 things I could be doing better.
I know.
But that's part of the journey, right? Is getting those first 100 whatever videos out, and improving.
So you've like committed, you're doing the weekly thing, you're making it happen.
Yeah, I'm trying to hit 100 videos at one a week at least, for however long that takes. We'll see.
Yeah, and I love that you shared that in your Twitter profile. It's like 21 out of 100. I think that's such a great, I assume it's partly for your own accountability, right? It's like, this is what I'm working on. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, because I know if I stall on that number for a while, I've got friends who will be like, hey, what's up?
Where's this week's video? Yeah. And I'm curious too, your thoughts on this, but it does feel a little bit like, since pandemic, that there's just more consumption happening with YouTube too. So it just feels like the natural, like in a way there'll be more competition, like more people will just be more active on YouTube, right? So there may be an element of how do we find good content now, which kind of has its own challenges. But yeah, you must notice it, just more people consuming their content on YouTube in general.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are just crazy. I think there's now like a billion monthly active users on YouTube, which it's nuts to think about. And you think about, oh, there's a lot of competition, right? Like we're both in the productivity space, and there's much bigger players in that space already, like the Ali Abdals and the Matt Divellas and all these people with 1 million subs. It feels like, oh, like, can I really start something that will grow that big?
Yeah.
But then you think about 1 billion users, there's maybe 300 million YouTube channels out there. So, if you do the math, there's actually a ton of potential for your own personal spin on these topics. And, it's not like I'm going to go copy Ali Abdal. Like, whatever I end up making videos about, I think we'll have my own spin on them. We'll have my own perspective on them as well. So I'm excited to see what happens, whether it's, if my channel grows, that's great. But if it doesn't, then it'll have been a fun experiment, and I'll have learned a whole bunch of skills about lighting and about camera stuff and about speaking to a camera, which is
storytelling.
Storytelling. Yeah. These are all skills that even if I quit YouTube in a year, I think being able to speak on camera and to have conversations with other people like this is such an important skill to have, that it's a win anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we forget to, like, you can hear the same thing like 100 different times, but like the way one person says it, you're like, yes, right.
Yes.
And so I think it's really about resonance, and we're all going to resonate with people in different ways. So even for me, like, voice is so important. If I don't, love somebody's voice, I don't listen to a lot of podcasts because I can find sometimes it's a bit grating. So I really have to feel like I jive with somebody's delivery style and their voice. And so
for sure.
that's not the case for everybody, or some creators are just like, they're like too broy, or like, they have presenter voice and it like feels overly exaggerated or whatever. So we forget that we're going to resonate with different people in different ways. And so even if it's been said before, it maybe hasn't been said with your particular inflection or the perspective that you're going to bring to it. So it's a good reminder.
Exactly. I used to coach weightlifting as sort of a side gig, and there's a lot of technique that's involved in the process, and every single athlete has a different like conception of what their body is doing during the movements, and it's that same thing that you can tell them, like, push with your legs, and they'll be like, what are you even talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. And you change something small, like instead of saying push through your legs, you say like, oh, push through the balls of your feet or something like that, and they just immediately go like, why didn't you tell me that? And it's a similar thing where you can say the same thing in 100 different ways, and 100 different people will resonate differently with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, certainly with Notion, I'm like, okay, wow, how you explain something with such a complex tool. You've got people who are super savvy with tech and have played with all sorts of different tech their whole lives, and people who are coming at it that have no experience whatsoever with other tools. Notion is their first tool like that. I'm like, oh wow, like the challenge of how to explain something from first principles, but that someone else wants to hear that information in a different way. How do you teach that at a course level such that information is enduring even when you're not there to clarify? So like, how do we distill this down? It is like the ultimate challenge, I think, to be really succinct in a course and to make sure that you're communicating in the right way. It's the challenge, the ultimate challenge.
That is the ultimate challenge with any kind of skilled like teaching product. It's tough.
Yeah. Hope to keep honing it.
Cool. Well, we're coming up on the end of the hour here, and I want to respect your time. But thank you so much for coming on. This has been great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Where can people find you online?
You can find me mariepoulin.com, Marie Poulin on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can probably just Google my name and find me at any one of those places. But Twitter is probably the one I'm most active on, I think. And YouTube, of course, if you're into productivity videos.
Awesome. Well, I'll put links to all those in the description below.
Awesome.
And again, thank you so much for coming on. This has been great.
Thank you so much.
Bye.